John Quincy Adams Ward was an American sculptor who did many fine historical pieces in the 1800s and early 1900s. He was born in Ohio in 1830 and later moved to Brooklyn, New York, where he was trained by sculptor Henry Kirk Brown. An interesting fact about John Quincy Adams Ward is that he was the first American sculptor to make American-type sculptures rather than neoclassical European sculptures. His works share many common themes, one of which being that they were almost all made of bronze. This is not surprising because the material of choice at his time was bronze. Another theme of Ward's was that many of his sculptures depicted historical figures or moments in history. Ward was a founder of the National Sculpture Society, as well as the president of the National Academy of Design. He died in New York City in 1910. A replica of the Indian hunter stands next to his gravesite. The Indian Hunter is Ward's first of 4 sculptures in Central Park. This sculpture has an American theme, showing a hunter with his bow and arrow in hand as well as his hunting dog. The Indian is walking calmly but intensely, looking for his next meal. The trust between the two is evident. The contrast between the two seem to complement each other well, making them a good team.
Ward portrays a Native American in his sculpture, The Indian Hunter. This Native American in the sculpture is very traditional. It seems it hasn't been affected by American culture as of yet, suggesting it may be west in America, to where it took Americans a little longer to take over the Native Americans. He's not wearing a lot of clothes and he has a bow and arrow with no modern technology at all. He also has a dog who seems to be his hunting aid, as well as something wrapped around his waist.
Yeah, like what TJ's saying, there doesn't seem to be any influence of Eastern Europe yet or anything like that, so this is probably before Columbus came to America, or like TJ said, out west. And the fact that he's wearing what seems to be like a fur pelt around his waist kind of shows how that the Native Americans took what they could off their land and what they could from the animals and didn't put anything to waste. And the bow and arrow is probably made by him or made by someone in his tribe, using deer string and high wood or bone.
And his hair also shows that he hasn't been influenced yet. It's very free-flowing and uncut. His stance is very ready to fight, and he seems to be holding back his dog.
He looks like, from his stance, like what Ziha was saying, that he looks like he's seen something and he wants to, and the dog especially wants to investigate, whereas he's sort of holding the dog back, like she said, and trying to scope out the scene. And you can see the muscles in his legs, they're really tense, so that kind of gives an indicator that they saw something. It also kind of suggests that they're really active, the Native Americans, and that he may be a nomad, and that he's a hunter, and that he's very active in his life, and he's not just sitting around doing nothing.
Ward does a good job in the sculpture of portraying the seriousness that the Native Americans took in their hunting. It was one of the most prideful things for a Native American to go hunting, and this is shown in his face. And also, I think the biggest, another note, the biggest factor that shows that they haven't been influenced by Western culture yet is his weapon of choice, which is not a gun. It's a bow and arrow, which is a traditional Native American weapon. And Native Americans later on got guns after they were invaded by Westerners.
He's also not wearing shoes, and that kind of shows how he's one with the land and that he feels one with nature, and it kind of shows the closeness to nature. Also, I think it's interesting that this sculpture is called the Indian Hunter, because there's a recent movement nowadays to not refer to Native Americans as Indians, because you need to recognize that they were indigenous to the Americas first, and that they aren't from India. So I think that's kind of interesting that it's still called the Indian Hunter, and it kind of shows the influence that what Ward was influenced by, like his environment as he was growing up in his society, and how they viewed Native Americans. This sculpture by Ward is again a full standing statue made out of bronze, this time depicting a political figure. The person shown in this piece is Roscoe Conkling, who is a politician that served in both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Conkling, who died at the age of 58, had many friends who wanted to commission a statue of him to be placed in Union Square. After being denied, Ward had designed the sculpture and it was placed in Madison Square Park in 1893. The statue shows Conkling in a bow tie, vest, and long coat. The pose he is in represents his political activism, as he is shown mid-speech with one hand out and another in his pocket. His posture is one that radiates confidence, and his face is quite serious.
Roscoe's stance shows us that he is mid-speech, and he seems to be describing a specific point. His right hand has his pointer finger and thumb pointing at something, and it seems to emphasize his point. His beard is well trimmed, and it kind of shows how he's ready to go face the public, and he cares about his appearance, and he wants to make sure that he looks presentable in front of the people that he's trying to rule over as a politician. And he's wearing a long coat and his pants, and his outfit's kind of also serious and more suited for making a speech or some event like that, like what you have saying. His other hand is, his thumb is tucked into his pocket, and that shows that he is very casual, he's very confident about what he's saying. It also could show that he wants to relate to the people and he wants to appear less imposing and intimidating.
Yeah, even though he still gives off that aura from his face.
The pointing we talked about before is also a common political stance that's used in speech giving and other types of political talk, and this just goes to show that Ward was portraying him to be a politician that Ward might have been a fan of.
This elegant bronze statue was unveiled in June of 1874. It honors the 58 Union soldiers of the 7th Regiment who died in the Civil War. The sculpture itself portrays an American soldier with his hands on a rifle, symbolizing his determination and confidence, as well as his refusal to give up. This sculpture was funded by officers and members of the regiment. Unlike the previous sculptures by Ward, this one is not one single historical figure, but rather a representation of a group of people. The pose and expression of the man portrayed is very interesting. The serious gaze of the man shows that he is always on edge and ready to fight at a moment's notice. However, the relaxation in his posture shows that he is still an ordinary man. Sculpted by John Quincy Adams Ward, this sculpture of George Washington was unveiled in 1883 to commemorate the first presidential inauguration. The location of the sculpture is of particular importance because it is in front of Federal Hall, where Congress first met and where Washington was inaugurated in 1789. The expression on the statue's face is composed, serious, and focused. The statue depicts Washington with his hand out, taking the oath of office. His left foot is forward, but unlike the 7th Regiment memorial statue, this pose suggests focus and is symbolic of how Washington was ready to step forward and take this position of power. Thus, his body language tells the history of his presidency, representing how he was ready for the United States to take the next step. Aesthetically, there is a lot of detail in this sculpture, especially in his clothes, which are historically accurate for the time.
Everything about this statue portrays the seriousness of the situation that he's in right now, that he's taking the oath of office, from how dressed up he is with the coat, boots, pants, the thing over his neck, and his face, which is really stern, and everything just points towards the fact that America's going into a very important time in its history, and that he's going to be the one to lead America through the first years of its glorious life.
Well, we already pointed out that his right hand is poised to take the oath of office. His other hand is not just resting at his side, like it is put out a little way from his body, showing that he is serious and he is tense right now, and he realizes that it is a big moment. And I think Ward captures that very well in this statue. Continuing on Ward's theme of historical sculptures, Shakespeare was first unveiled in Central Park in 1872. This bronze sculpture shows the pensive mind of Shakespeare, depicting him gazing towards the ground. Shakespeare is also shown clutching a journal or book of some kind in his right hand. Again, Ward creates great detail in the clothing of his character, which is consistent with Shakespeare's time period. Much like the previous two sculptures, his leg is placed forward, although it seems to be more natural and a result of his deep thought. Like almost all of Ward's sculptures, the portrayal of William Earl Dodge is made from bronze. Dodge is one of the founders of Phelps, a leading mining company, as well as an organizer of the YMCA. Originally unveiled in 1885, this sculpture stood in Herald Square. It wasn't until 1941 that it moved to Bryant Park, which is where it stands to this day. Along with the change of location, there was also a change in pedestal to one made of granite. The new pedestal featured a drinking fountain to commemorate Dodge's commitment to temperance. The sculpture portrays Dodge in a positive light, leaning on a podium with a relaxed warmth in his face. Thus, the sculpture depicts him as a respectable man.
Dodge's left leg is pointed out, and he seems to be leaning on some books that are on top of the pedestal that he is leaning against. He is very casual, very calm.
One of the things I noticed about this sculpture and a lot of Ward sculptures is that the person that he's portraying in his statues often are taking a very casual pose. In this case, he's leaning against some sort of pedestal, and this is just a common theme through many of Ward's works.
For example, like in the Washington, he also had his right foot out, his right leg out from his body, and is leaning on something.
His hands are also crossed in front of him, and that shows that he is poised and collected.
The fact that he's wearing a coat suggests that Ward wanted him to be portrayed somewhere outside, which kind of contrasts with the fact that there's a column in books. So you kind of don't know where Ward wants you to see him. So it allows the viewer to sort of picture him and place him wherever you want him to be. He seems to be wearing some sort of suit outfit underneath his jacket, which kind of shows his formal way of dress and how he's ready to be in public if he wants to be, or if he's indoors at an event or something. And his hair seems to be groomed back, and it kind of just shows him as a respectable man.
He actually seems to be holding some type of handkerchief between his hands, between his folded hands.
That's interesting because people don't normally carry around handkerchiefs when they're not using them, so it kind of shows how he may be a little bit different from the rest of society and how he doesn't really want to conform to society's rules as much, yet that still contrasts with his outfit being respectable and decent. The Pilgrim was unveiled in 1885. The sculpture depicts one of the pilgrims that landed at Massachusetts Plymouth Rock in December of 1620. The statue is located on Pilgrim Hill in Central Park. The Pilgrim was commissioned by the New England Society to commemorate the organization's 75th anniversary. The pedestal it stands on features key elements to the Pilgrims, including the Mayflower ship, an image of the Bible, and a sword. The inscription on the pedestal says, "To commemorate the land of the Pilgrim Fathers on Plymouth Rock, December 21st, 1620. The man is leaning on a musket and emits a very serious and intimidating aura. The man looks powerful and determined in his facial expression. Ward's depiction of this was given a full-scale restoration in 1979.
By his stance, it seems Ward has portrayed this pilgrim. Looking at his first glance of America, he seems very prepared for anything. He's very stoic. His musket seems to show that he is ready for anything.
Yet at the same time, you can see that his left hand is kind of relaxed at his side, unlike the George Washington statue, but that contrasts with his right hand, which is firmly gripping his musket. But also on top of that, he's also just leaning on his musket, so it kind of shows that he's a determined man, and he's ready for anything, even though like Wizzy was saying, like he wants to take in what he's seeing before him, but at the same time, he's prepared for anything that might come out from America.
Yeah, it looks like he's gazing out to America as like the newfound land that many more Europeans after him are gonna end up calling home one day.
He's wearing boots and what looks to be thick pants, as well as jackets and what looks to be a heavy jacket and a hat, and it kind of suggests that he's dressed for colder weather, and also kind of enhances the idea that he's prepared for anything, including weather.
In conclusion, the 7 sculptures we did were George Washington, the Indian Hunter, Shakespeare, the 7th Regiment Memorial, Roscoe Conkling, William Earl Dodge, and the Pilgrim.
John Quincy Adams Ward was one of the first sculptors to create works based off of American culture, such as his most famous work, the George Washington statue. Other works featuring people from American history include the Indian Hunter, the 7th Regiment Memorial, the Pilgrim, Roscoe Conkling, and William Earl Dodge.
Bronze sculptures offer artists a way in which to perfectly capture the likeness of a person through facial expressions, pose, clothing, and objects around them. The sculptor can convey their life story or the most important aspects of their life.
The sculptures of John Quincy Adams Ward reflect pieces of history and show influence of the Romantic period, which peaked from 1800 to 1850. Each of his pieces conveys strong emotions in the figure's facial expression, as was custom for the Romanticism style.
Thank you.